it's Scott, ROCKFILE, back with another podcast for you. Let's talk about the state of rock and roll, especially from a radio programming perspective. And what the hell are you people all bitching about Motley Crue for? All right, I don't want to, bother anybody, get a whole bunch of comments about how great this band is, all right? I guess a lot of people can't do what I have to do every single day. I have to listen to a new song from whoever it is without any preconceptions, without worrying about whether it's one of my favorite songs from one of my favorite bands or anything. I can't listen to music that way. Not the first time I listened to it. I have spent many, many years in the radio industry, and when I listen to a song, I'm listening to it, as I've mentioned before, with two sets of ears. One, personally, do I like the song? Obviously, most people, when you listen to a song, that's the first thing that happens. Do I like it? But what takes over that thinking is, does this fit any of my radio stations? Is there anything about this that makes people tune out? Because the goal in radio is to keep you listening. And I'm not going to play a song that, 3/4 into it, it's going to turn into a death metal song that's going to make people turn the radio station. I'm not afraid to rock, and I'm not afraid to get heavy, but there's a point that some people just tune out. Believe me, I've worked in radio for many years. You can just count on it. And now I have 2 internet radio stations. I can literally be listening to a song, know when it's coming up, and watch whether it dips or goes up in people listening during that song. So when people immediately tune out of something in internet radio, we see that immediately. So for me, when I listen to a brand new song, even if it's from somebody like Motley Crue, I have to listen to it. Is it going to fit the radio station? And so I close my eyes and I listen to the song like I'm the radio station. And I didn't have a problem with the Motley Crue song at all. Let me preface this by saying, personally, Scott does not give a crap about Motley Crue. I have never liked Motley Crue. I have never bought a Motley Crue album. I have been to many shows. I think they're incredible showmen. Every Motley Crue concert I've ever seen has been off the hook, incredibly entertaining. No complaints about their shows. I've met the band. They looked like Warmed Over Death. They were the first band we ever heard of that played the backing tracks. Now, the lip sync thing it's they've been caught more times than you can count. Phantom guitars, phantom drums, phantom basses, phantom vocals, all that kind of stuff. Matter of fact, watched a video this morning from Classic Album Rock, whatever. He's a British YouTube channel, and he was the top 10 lip sync faux pas of recent memory. And I think Motley Crue was number 2 on the list behind Roger Waters. Anyway, personally, my opinion of Motley Crue is they're a great radio band. They have several songs off each album that are still viable at all radio formats, from classic rock to active rock. The band puts on great tours. They have a massive fan base, millions of fans. Personally, wouldn't cross the street to watch them unless the tickets were free and I was escorting my radio station people. I'm just not a fan, but that's okay. I'm not a fan of a lot of things I play on the radio, but I understand that they're good radio things to play on the radio. They're good songs to play on the radio. Motley Crue is a classic band who has a bunch of quote-unquote radio hits. When I say that, I'm not talking in the top 40 Casey Kasem way, but for rock radio, which is different than most other formats, songs stand the test of time, even if they weren't big hits at the time. We play a lot of songs that were never released as official singles that the public, the fans just requested, they listened to, they made the sales. They made it happen. Stairway to Heaven is the prime example of a song that was never released by the record label, and it's, everybody knows that song. So anyway, when the Motley Crue came out, I was like, all right. I was already percolating the idea of this podcast, and I actually recorded one that I deleted because it was a little harsher than this. Let me tell you, from my point of view, I program a rock station that is a public entity. The public has to listen to it. It's not programmed for me in any way, shape, or form. I don't care. I have 2 internet radio stations at home. If I want to make a radio station sound exactly like what I want to hear, I can do that at home. But at work, professionally, I have to create a music-oriented radio station that is listenable and sellable. We have to have listeners that gives us ratings. And It has to be something that the salespeople can go out and go, we have a bunch of people listening to this great radio station. Don't you want to be on it? Don't you want to be part of this story? And so a lot of psychology goes into what we play. And again, rock is different. If I were doing a top 40 station, which we have one, or a country station or whatever, most of the time you just can play the hits. This song was in the top 5 of the year or the month it came out. It's going to be viable for years down the road because it was a number one song. Casey Kasem said so, or Rick D said so, or Ryan Seacrest said so, whatever. It got played thousands of times on thousands of radio stations, and it became part of popular culture. It happens all the time with popular music. Rock is a hair different because some songs aren't released as singles, don't get that, but still somehow, some way bubble up. Some program directors, back in the day it used to be, some program directors really liked that song and they started playing it. Other stations saw it moving up the charts and went, that is a pretty good song, maybe we should play it. And magically, songs made it into the top 10 and became rock hits. These days, you have a lot of programmers that work for big companies who are just looking at numbers. How many spins did it get on Spotify? How many stations are on it? How many things did it sell this weekend, the first week it came out? And numbers are a big part of everything I do as well. I mean, how can you discount any of that? But bottom line, the song has to fit my radio station. And there are a lot of songs that have hit number one on the rock chart in the last year that we don't play, that we never did play. I'm not playing any country crossover. I'm not playing any rap crossover. I'm not playing any alternative crossover. I'm playing songs that rock. We play a lot of Dirty Honey and Black Crowes and Disturbed and Godsmack and Fozzy and I'm trying to think of the other stuff that's on, Greta Van Fleet, songs that can be up against AC/DC and Van Halen and still sound good and not sound like a boy band that we just switched stations. And that gets me into the whole Spotify and why I don't think the Motley Crue song is that bad. I listen to every single. Pop singles, country singles, and rock singles. And I have a couple of independent rock radio song promoters, I guess you would call them, who send me as many as 5 to 10 songs a week and go, what do you think of these? And I will listen to them. And if I have time, I will write them little reviews. Well, I think this one could go on the radio. I think this one's not going to make it. I think this one's going to mid-chart. I think this is a cookie cutter, just sounds like everything else and will blend in, that kind of thing. I usually give them some feedback so they know. And I am not like every other programmer out there, but I'm a programmer who's confident in what he's doing because he's done it for so long. Before anybody says, well, you're old and you're not playing a whole bunch of new stuff, I play a lot of new stuff, and I have a progressive rock station that I program. Believe me, I play brand new stuff. I have 2 internet stations that are built on playing new music. Every other song, every second song on the radio is new on both of those radio stations, and I have to cultivate that music every week. One station carries over 30 currents. The other station carries 40 currents every week. So there's a lot of new rock and new prog out there. And then for my FM mainstream rock station for a medium-sized market, we filter that down. We don't play all of those 30 or 40 rock songs. We find the ones that fit this station because it's not so much our format is not to introduce new music, it's to create that blend that you really want to listen to. We're based on kind of a 3-song cycle of 2 of the songs are going to be 70s, 80s, and 90s, and then 1 song is going to be from the 21st century. And you're going to roll through the clocks that way, through the hours that way. So you get a variety of stuff, a mixture of 70s, 80s, and 90s, and then something new. A little more 70s, 80s, 90s, and something new. And anyway, there's psychology in what we do and all that. And so, again, I have to find songs that fit the radio station. And I'm getting a lot of songs that have 1 million plays on Spotify and other streaming services. But are Spotify listeners radio listeners? I don't think so. I think people went to Spotify because they were tired of radio. And in the major markets, I totally get that. You know, I just left South Florida 2.5 years ago, and I had a hard time listening to any of the stations on the FM dial. So repetitive, so cookie cutter, so bland, so no personality. Even some of the morning shows, they were just talking to talk. Some of them were so long in the tooth, they should have been put out of their misery long before. There just wasn't anything exciting happening there. People were turning to podcasts at that time and streaming stations and stuff. And even Spotify, because an algorithm was better than, well, hearing a bunch of commercials you didn't want to hear and then a bunch of guys talking and no music, at least for the music listeners. But people that are still into Spotify and are not into vinyl, CDs, or some of the other ways to listen to music, I don't think they're switching back and forth from radio to Spotify. They're two totally different things. And in the market I currently work in with my 6 radio stations, people use the radio a lot. We are in Alaska. We are in a kind of secluded market. It's giant. It's as big as a small state. But the Kenai Peninsula kind of is its own thing. We don't get stations from Anchorage in here. There's mountains between us and them. So this Kenai Peninsula is like one isolated area. And since we don't have really TV stations and nobody's carrying around their TVs with them except in their RVs, sure, we have cell phones, but you know what I mean? People listen to the radio. And from working at radio stations like Key Largo and Grand Cayman, I realized that people listen to the radio in those places differently. Commercials aren't so much advertising as they are letting people know what's going on, where the sales are, where the bars are, where the specials are, that kind of stuff. People in isolated areas tend to use radio differently than people who are oversaturated with radio streaming services and everything else. And so here, you have to listen to the radio to find out what's going on. That's the primary source, because our newspaper is dying here, as they are mostly across the country. And honestly, we're an outdoorsy people here in Alaska. Not everybody is sitting on their computers and their phones and their tablets all day long. So getting back to the topic of Spotify and new bands, I get a lot of singles that I'm 10, 15 seconds in and I'm done. I can't play it. It sounds like an auto-tuned boy band. There's a couple of templates now that some modern bands are using, and these are all the bands that are doing very well on Spotify, but for some reason are not getting much play on the radio, except maybe Sirius Octane. But for like real radio and radio stations around the country and on the radio charts, these songs are not doing as well. And why? Well, because there's a different listenership on Spotify and streaming services than there is in radio. And there's a certain sound to radio. To take an isolated example, here we have an incredible beach that's not overused. It's clean. You can go out there on some days and you're almost by yourself. And people will go out there with their vehicles and open up the doors and turn on the radio station, and they want to hear some great songs to have a fun time to. And whether they're listening to pop or country or rock, we have to create something that's, well, you got to fit the commercials in there and some imaging to give it some personality, but we've got to play the right music or people are going to go away and find something else. And you're really not going to stream Spotify on the beach, so radio. It's simple. People still buy little radios and put them out. You know, it's a wonderful thing about living here. So anyway, when I hear a new song, even if it's the new Motley Crue, I have to go, does that song fit the radio? And a lot of these singles from these bands, I'm not picking on this band, but Dayseeker, go listen to that. I have some friends that are really into this band, and I don't think they're bad. They're really good live. He's a really good singer, but this new song, I had my friends posting that it was fire, and I went and listened to it and went, all right, this is going to be too heavy for me to play. And it was like a boy band, and then it kind of stayed like a boy band, and then I guess about 3/4 of the way through, he started emo screaming, and then it went back to the boy band thing, and then it was done, and I'm like, I'm not even sure that was a rock song that I just listened to. And I'm getting a lot of those. So nothing against Dayseeker. They're an up-and-coming, they're a big band, they're a good band. I'm not saying anything bad. The new single is just not something I can play on my station. And you're like, well, maybe Sirius Octane is playing it. Really? Because if that fits next to Disturbed, maybe in your music library, I just can't. And again, it's not a thing that I'm too old to hear. Look, I started my radio career in the 80s. And I watched rock and all the other formats get too slick for their own good. And eventually there was a snapback that people gravitated towards this new thing called grunge and this new thing that was hitting the mainstream called metal. And that kind of pushed all that highly slick, very robot-sounding production out of the way. The 90s got very much back to reality, back to basics. And then you had Cher's Believe. And a producer was using that for something fun. And then everybody started using auto-tune. And now you don't know who's singing, what's AI, because everything sounds like a robo-vocal. We are this close to snapping back like a rubber band, and we're going to get something else like grunge or metal, something that's real, something that's not computer-generated. Why I've always gravitated towards rock music, and that's even suspect these days with you playing to backing tapes and live auto-tune and things like that. When I go see a rock band, I don't mind if things are out of tune or things are a little loose. You're a rock band playing live. I want to see something real. But as far as album goes, I had to learn in my career that when a producer and a band go into a studio, they're going to produce the best album they can produce. They're not thinking of reproducing it live, making the videos. None of that plays into it unless it's a big concept or whatever. But they need to record the best sounding music. And if they use studio trickery in there to get that, great, but the band's got to reproduce it at some point. But to create music for the radio, to create music for streaming, and to create music for albums, they really just have to go into a room and kind of isolate themselves and make some music. So Bob Rock produced this new Motley Crue song. He produced Metallica's Black Album. He produced Dr. Feelgood. He's responsible for that giant sound and the engineers that he told to produce the way, what he wanted. So he's done something new with Motley Crue. I was laughing at all these comments on Friday. Oh my. First of all, people are putting Motley Crue on some kind of pedestal, that there's some Zeppelin or even Guns N' Roses, and Motley Crue never was to me. Yes, they've sold out stadiums, and yes, they've had big tours, and yes, they've had big album sales and sold millions of albums. I'm not taking anything away from that. But as far as talent goes, they've just never been on that same platform with any of these other bands, not in my opinion. And we knew it, I know folks from LA, this is one of their favorite bands because it came off the streets and all that, and I know the story and everything, but a lot of it is story. I mean, I was actually in high school researching religions and stuff for a senior project, and we kind of delved into the whole shout at the devil thing for a while because we got into witchcraft and Satanism and a few other things too, because we had to contrast the good and the bad, and the whatever. Anyway, you can't do a thorough scientific paper if you don't go into all of it. So anyway, most of their stuff is for show as far as that goes. And they're great showmen. They're right up there with Kiss as far as marketing, showmanship, and all that. They just stumbled a little bit here and there through substance abuse and other stories where Kiss kind of kept it going. Kiss stumbled a few times too, but I would argue that they probably have a lot more in the bank than Motley Crue does. Now, again, I respect Motley Crue for their radio career. I can go look in my music system right now at the radio station, and there's a whole bunch of Motley Crue in there. We regularly go into deep cuts from their albums. We know they're a popular band. I'm not taking anything away from them. But to listen to this new song and go, it's horrible, it's terrible, somebody said it didn't have a hook? Do you know what you're talking about? Listen to it again. If it doesn't get stuck in your head, I have one of my closest friends years ago told me a Disturbed song, the very first Disturbed song didn't have a hook. And I went, my friend, the whole song is a hook. Stupefy is nothing but a hook, right? So this has some great John 5 guitar in it. It sounds different than the band. If they came out and did Dr. Feelgood Part 2, you'd be bitching. So they did something new. You don't like it, you don't have to buy it. Another friend said, it doesn't equal their other stuff. They're not going to play it live, so who cares? And I'm like, they will play it live because the band's got to play something new. I mean, they just can't go out there and be This is why, you don't see Pink Floyd touring anymore. If they don't have new music, they weren't going to become this nostalgia band and just go out there and play the greatest hits. As much as that's very lucrative these days, they're one of those bands that just doesn't want to do that. And there's a lot of bands who don't want to do that, who want to have some new music when they go out in the public. Now, I almost just lump Motley Crue into bands that I truly respect, who I think are creative geniuses. I think Motley Crue are great showmen and marketing. I don't ever think they're musical genius in any way, shape, or form. And if they left the planet tomorrow, I wouldn't care. When they signed the contract to not tour anymore, I didn't care. It didn't mean anything to me. And this new song doesn't mean anything to me either, as far as being a fan or not. But when I listen to it, I go, that's a good song for the radio. It's a little repetitious. Boom. That's good for the radio. It's not too heavy, but it's heavy. I mean, that riff is pretty heavy. It's overproduced, but compare it to the new Dayseeker. Compare it to any of the new tracks from the up-and-coming bands. It's not overproduced compared to that. And some of the people I saw commenting it are in those bands. Oh, it's overproduced. It ain't Motley Crue. Really? Mr. Backing Track, auto-tune? Anyway. If you're a Motley Crue fan and this rubs you the wrong way, great. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. But as a radio programmer, this actually doesn't suck. They haven't released a song that I wanted to play on the radio since the 90s. So this is kind of a big deal for us because nothing they put out, what was that, Hooligans Holiday? No, that was a GNR song. See? they haven't released anything in decades that radio stuck with. Yes, and I'll even pull out that John Corabi album every once in a while. But I am not a Motley Crue fan, and I think the song's fine. Is it changing the world? Is it going to stick around? Is it going to be a number one? It might be a number one rock song on the radio. Are people going to hate it until they love it? Probably. This is probably going to be the next Nickelback. Look, if you want to bitch about Motley Crue lip syncing and playing to backing tapes, knock yourself out. But they put out a piece of trash that's overproduced. Really? Have you listened to Sirius Octane? Nothing against the programmers and the people at Sirius Octane. They're going for a different audience. But I think some programmers in some of the major markets forget what it's like in the rest of the markets and the rest of the world. I'm very thankful that I have 2 internet radio stations and I get a vibe not just on the United States. So as far as I get hundreds, if not thousands of songs a week, more than I can listen to. Motley Crue is not bad compared. I mean, I get things recorded in garages. I get things, that are not in English. That if it's good enough, it really doesn't matter if it's in English, does it? That's a whole nother podcast. Anyway, I don't use Spotify in any way, shape, or form if the song's going to be a hit or not. I use my ears. And if other radio stations are on it, that's great. But yes, I do look down the rock chart and go, wow, who's playing this? Wow, who's playing this? Wow, who's... Again, if you're doing something for your market, maybe your market likes country crossover. I have no need. I have a country station that plays Hardy and Jelly Roll all day long, country artist of the year and all that. Why do I need to play them on my rock station? Why do people need to be confused when they punch around? Everybody who listens to one of my rock stations will say, that's a great rock station. I turned it on. I listened for a couple songs, 3 songs. That's a great rock station. Here's a hint. In radio, you should be able to tell a great rock station in 3 songs. Any great radio station in 3 songs, you'd be able to tell the format. And I can tell you, you can on mine. So anyway, Motley Crue, the song is not bad. You're going to hear it on the radio a lot. If you hate it, well, get ready to change the station. Don't buy it. But if this is a band you truly love, why are you bashing them? Go out and support them. Go buy a concert ticket if they go sell it. If they put out a Blu-ray or a DVD, support. If you want them to continue, great. But if you don't want them to do anything else, keep bashing them. Don't buy it. Don't listen to it and turn it off. And your cancel culture kind of life today will make it disappear and make the band disappear. And if that's what you want, great. I don't know. I would put this up against the new Rolling Stones or some of the other new tracks from classic bands that have come out on whether or not it's going to stick on the radio or not. I don't know. I'm not a Motley Crue fan. I'm not the one to decide if this is a good Motley Crue song. But as rock songs go in 2024, it's not horrible. I've got a lot of more overproduced stuff that I'm trying not to play on the radio. Here's a classic band trying something new, and it's not terrible. I'll give it a spin or 2. We'll see. Anyway. I've had a real kick out of the people bitching about the Motley Crue. Like, it's like Led Zeppelin put out a Debbie Gibson cover or something. You would think people's heads are exploding that this is some band who is so sacred that, well, people don't do Zeppelin covers for a reason, people. Yeah, I don't know why. Anyway, it's been humorous. You guys are great. Thank you for listening. Have a spectacular day. Keep listening to new music. Don't let it go away. Bye.